Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to wherever you are in the world. My name is Earle, the coordinator of Organizing for Power, a global training and networking program for organizers all across the world. And I am here today with our lead trainer, Jane McAlevey. For those of you who do not know, in spite of having spent much time with Jane on the screen, we have never actually met in person. So this is a historic moment for us and for Organizing for Power in that sense. We are here today. We are in Berlin. We are both fortunate enough to be fully vaccinated, and we want to say right from the start that this puts us in a global minority. The vast majority of people right now are not getting access to vaccinations. This program, Organizing for Power, it's all about workers' rights and human rights, and we firmly believe that the single biggest human rights struggle right now in the world is about access to vaccination, access to health care, and it is of the utmost importance that people in the global north and the rich, industrialized, capitalist core countries not just go back to life as ordinary, to their brunches and whatever else, while millions and millions of people are struggling, are dying from this ongoing pandemic. And this is something that should be central in all of our struggles and all of our analysis. An injury to one is an injury to all. So, having said that, here we are today, and we are going to take on a number of the questions that all of you have sent to us across the program that we just finalized, Workers Rising Everywhere. We have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of questions, but we're very good, and we can't answer all of them. It would require us to spend another 12 hours together in front of Zoom. As much as we enjoy company, that would be too much for today. But we have tried to select some and cluster a number of questions that we think would be particularly useful for the greatest number of you. And we're going to dive into all of those in just one moment. But my first question for you, Jane, is to tell us a little bit more about what it is that brings us together in person for the first time.
Yeah. First, let me just say again how very nice it is to actually be in a room with Earle after developing this whole program together and not ever being in a room with Earle. I think I want to pick back up on what you were just saying about COVID and vaccine apartheid for a minute, and how privileged we are as people from the global north who have been fully vaccinated. Part of the push for me to get here relates kind of indirectly or directly to the topic, which is healthcare workers in Berlin, hospital workers in particular, registered nurses, technical workers, and more, that people will remember they met in the opening session. In session 1A, we featured a very exciting, dynamic, short presentation by, I think it was 100 plus nurses in Berlin who presented for all of us to see one of the methods of the course, which is a structure test. And they unfurled and showed thousands and thousands and thousands of healthcare workers' signatures from the Berlin area, because there's a huge campaign going on here. So it links COVID, the right for hospital workers to get personal protective equipment that they're desperate for so that they can care for the patients, and the kind of demands that workers are making and must make coming out of this pandemic, not just hospital workers, but every worker who was asked to continue working while the rest of us were fortunate, like me, to largely sit behind Zoom at home. And so we felt like if we could get vaccinated, and the hospital workers campaign in Berlin really wanted me to sort of come back. I began to do this work with them 2 years ago. And they were very much hoping, as they were building up, right? They're going to a peak very soon. There are elections in Germany coming in September. And Verdi and the nurses and the hospital workers have strategically positioned the build-up to their contract demands towards the federal elections. So the timing just worked, that the vaccine, for some of us who are privileged in countries that are hoarding the vaccine, made it possible for me to come full circle with a group of hospital workers here in Berlin that I began to have the pleasure of working with in February of 2019, who have been using the methods of the course, which is part of why it was so important and exciting to have them in the very opening session. People in the evening, what we would call the evening 1B, did not get to meet them live or see them live on screen, but the large part of Workers Rising Everywhere, which we call the A track, early evening, right, in Europe, and very early in the morning if you were in the US, or in the middle of the night if you were somewhere else, those folks got to meet these incredibly dynamic nurses. So that was the urgency for me to show back up for the first time and jump on an international flight, and it was an amazing secondary excuse to get some planning time with you.
Yeah,
and the team at Rosa-Lux.
Yeah, and maybe we'll have a chance to feature the nurses at some point in the future.
Yeah.
You'll have to stay tuned for that, and you might all have a chance to meet with them. But certainly it's a great example of using the skills from the course in practice to fight and hopefully win campaigns.
Right, to fight and win.
That's right.
One of our favorite words, right, is fight and win.
Yeah, so starting sort of at the top in terms of the questions, you say often in your writing and also in this course that you're teaching methods and not models. Could you unpack that a little bit? Could you say a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's there's so many good questions, as Ethan says, but I think this is a sort of a fundamental one. So I do actually say over and over and over again that there isn't a model, because a model is something that's got a fixed position. It doesn't change at all. And the difference, I think, with methods, the way I think about methods is there's core concepts to them, but they are adjusted for different situations. So they adapt and adjust culturally. They adapt and adjust for whether you're doing community-based organizing or whether you're doing workplace-based organizing, whether you're a climate campaigner or a trade union organizer. A rigid model couldn't possibly work across all those terrains, but methods like, are you actually waking up in the morning with a plan that's going to get you talking to 100% of whoever the universe of people is that you're trying to reach? That's a method and an approach. If the goal is we want to build supermajorities and we want to bring lots more people into the struggle with us in order to, stop fascism and save the planet, for example, we have to wake up in the morning and fixate on, first off, how do we reach 100% of the people that we should be talking to? Second of all, so that's a method. It's we start by saying, okay, the principle is talk to everyone. The methods then are, how do we do that? And so that's really different than a model. I think methods are principle-based, so we have a set of principles, which is we have to involve every single person. And the question is, how do we do that? And then methods are more fluid, they're more adjustable, and they're also a craft, organizing the way we're teaching it in the Organizing for Power series, the way I learned it. It's a craft, and it's a series of methods that don't have, they all unfold together, which I think we're going to get to today at some point, when you're running an actual campaign. And campaigns are fluid. So I think the word model implies rigidity.
Right.
And I think method implies nimbleness, flexibility, but an attachment to core principles and being sure that you have an approach that's going to get you to the core principles of how do we build a mass movement.
Right. And I think that's incredibly and particularly important in a global program where we have folks from, 100 some countries and from the labor movement, but also from other areas of our shared struggles. And, the feedback that we've received from, landless workers in India to commercial workers in Tanzania to folks from across the world who are really dialing in on these methods and how they can be adapted in different circumstances is it's a beautiful thing. It's an empowering thing to hear back from them about.
Yeah.
So we have our in our core class, we've got leader identification and structured organizing conversations, and we've got charting, and we've got structure tests. We have these different skills that we teach one by one. What does this mean in a campaign? What is the right order for deploying each of these things? Is it one by one, that we do one and then we finish it and we do the next? Or how does all of this integrate into that moment where the campaign pops off?
Yeah, it's such a good question, and it's such a complex answer. And this is why it's methods and not models, because different campaigns require how you deploy things differently. That's just one concept. But the first thing I would say is there's a difference between the order in which we're teaching each of the skills that link to the principles and the methods versus real life. So we start with Leader ID, and the reason we start with Leader ID in the class is because it's the most fundamental concept that most of the progressive movement has never heard or understood before, which is like, we're used to thinking whoever shows up at the meeting, is who our universe is. And so leader ID, leader identification, figuring out who's the most respected worker leader, or who's the most respected community member, or who's the most respected leader in your faith, if you belong to a faith tradition or something, understanding that unlocks our capacity to then build supermajorities is this fundamental concept. And that if we're only talking to ourselves, so we start there because it's literally the grounding concept. If the principle is building a mass movement, the question is the how. That's the methods, that's the skills. But then it gets all messy in real life. So we teach leader ID as the first concept because it's foundational. And then we move on to semantics and structured organizing conversations, right? How we have the conversation, then we move on to charting, then we move on to structure tests, and then later in a different class or some of our other classes, we go on to the community and bargaining and strikes. But in our core fundamentals class, the truth is the first real skill, which is why we spend so much time on it, that you have to be able to deploy successfully to make all the other puzzle pieces work, is having a really effective structured organizing conversation, which means understanding the words that you want to put into a structured organizing conversation. So that's semantics and having a good conversation. And oftentimes, like if I'm starting a campaign, let's just say I'm starting we'll take it two different ways initially. One is a new organizing campaign, workers who have no union. And if you're starting a new organizing campaign, the first structure test is generally, are they willing to sign either a hand-signed petition, depending on the country and the laws, or a membership card of some kind that states that they want to be part of a union? That's usually your first structure test. Well, the reason that you're having a conversation with the worker, which has to be an effective conversation, therefore the 6-step structured organizing conversation, the reason that you're having the conversation with the worker is about a structure test. And the first structure test is about, do a supermajority of these workers actually want to get together and form a union? Right. But we're doing what we call list work. People will remember, we hope, that at the end of the structured organizing conversation, like one of the most important things you're doing is asking them about every single worker that they know and the relationship between the workers that they know. That's actually getting at leader identification. So literally, it's all at once. Right. You have to be able to have a good structured organizing conversation to unlock a conversation about list work, which is who all the workers know and who relates to who, and who respects each other. That's a very open conversation. Who tends to hang out together? Have you seen examples of when one worker took action together and did something and everyone else participated? Like, there's a whole series of conversations that we have in a structured organizing conversation at step 6, right, which is the list work. Well, the list work is how you're building your wall charts. So it's literally all in one 45-minute conversation. You're doing a structure test, you're building your wall charts, you're deploying semantics and a structured organizing conversation as you're doing it, and you're doing leader identification in the conversation. So literally every one of the core skills we teach is at work at once, in real life, in a real life campaign. It's a really important lesson for understanding how this is a coherent whole. It is not these sort of isolated... you do this piece, and then you do that piece, and then you do that piece. One is finished, and you go on to the next. That's right. It's literally all one. Literally, every structured organizing conversation, which deploys good semantics, is about understanding issues, framing choices, engaging with the worker in list work to understand which workers respect which workers. You're building your list to make your chart, and you're literally doing a structure test. So every single thing is happening in my first conversation with the worker. All things we're doing at once. Okay.
Let us, though, spend a moment on these leaders, and if you could say a few more words about the qualities of an organic leader, and also in so doing a little bit more about the order in which to approach workers. And you oftentimes say you have one chance with the leader, and that can feel really, really scary if you don't know who that person is. Or say a little bit more about the identification process and the ordering process.
Yeah, great. So qualities. The qualities of organic leaders and why they're tricky, and why I think they're particularly tricky for people who've been doing activist work for so long, is one, they're often the best workers. They're often very, very, very good workers. That means almost inherently that they have at least a functioning working relationship with their manager or with management. So that throws most progressives. Like, we look at people like that with a nervous eye. Like, that person seems to be in relationship to the manager, and the manager seems to like them. They seem to get better schedules. They seem to have high-functioning equipment if there's equipment in their job, or a better schedule if it's a schedule-related question. And so a lot of times, activists in the workplace, if they're not, trained in the skills that we're teaching, skills that I learned from my mentors, you will literally skip over the person who probably has the capacity to unlock building a supermajority in their unit, department, or workplace, because we're worried that they're close to management. They're close to management quality-wise because they're very good at their job. And so management understands that it's really essential to have that worker or that one or two or three workers if it's a big shift or big unit. Management understands that they need to be in relationship to that person to actually have the job done, and it makes us skeptical of them. And also, that same quality means that because management is often trying to satisfy some of the better workers, a lot of their needs are met. And so they get the best equipment and they get the best schedules and they get better pay. So they see less of a reason for a union initially, because their needs are getting met, because management's trying to keep them happy, because they're an effective and good worker. That's typical, right? None of these, there's no hard rule here, but that's a normative process. That's typical in a workplace. So the qualities often make it so that they are least likely to come to union meetings. They don't feel a need because a lot of their personal needs are being met in the workplace. So that's what's confusing for people, is this quality issue. Often close to management, and that means that, by the way, what's not going to be effective is running up and running a bunch of garbage about how awful bosses and management is. That's not going to be effective with an organic leader, right? Who's really interested in doing a good job, whatever a good job means. They generally are good at it. So the kind of language we use gets back to semantics, by the way, in the structured organizing conversation. Like, approaching someone and telling them what's wrong with management when they actually have a functioning relationship with management is not going to be a useful way to build a supermajority in your workplace. And part, by the way, I will say, because organizing is about transformation and change, we hope that one of the things that all organic leaders come to understand, and they have to if we're being successful, is that there's a real limitation to what their relationship with management means, right? So we hope we're transforming people's thinking and helping an organic leader understand decisions aren't even made by their manager. Decisions are made by some corporate, hedge fund, private equity. Someone 10,000 miles away is making the decision to cut your facility to the bone with no staff. It's not the line manager that you're in relationship with. So we're helping them politically have a new understanding of the capitalist system functionally, right? So that's going to be part of our work once we identify them. And we don't identify them. We have to remember this. It's workers who identify them. Jane McAlevey cannot walk into any work site, or Ethan Earle, and be like, that person sounds really good at the meeting. They must be the leader. We don't do that. We have very open conversations. That's what list work is. But we're asking people, tell us who relates to each other. Give us examples of where one worker's taken action. That's an iterative process we're having that's open. There's nothing secretive about it. It's a very open process. So it's tricky because of the qualities. And then the order question, because these workers are often skeptical, have a healthy skepticism of unions, I think it shouldn't be surprising to anyone taking our courses, or to anyone really at this point on planet Earth almost, that there's like a reason to be skeptical. There's enough examples, there's enough experiences that people have had where their union may not have been the best experience, if it wasn't so democratic, if it wasn't making great decisions, that they're skeptical of the union.
Yep.
So in order for us to win them over to the cause and help them shift from my relationship to the manager is important to me, to my relationship with my coworkers is actually foundational to everything I'm doing in whether or not I'm going to be able to retire and survive on the planet. That's a subtle political education and transformation going on in the organizing campaign with the organic leader, but we have to know everything about them so that we can be whoever we is, including who the we should be who approaches them, right? That's fundamental. Like, who's the best person to approach this person?
Right.
It may not, like, even in, I talk about the Philadelphia campaign in my new book, and I talk about it a lot in the class. It's like, even in Philadelphia, I may not be the best person, even though people are very confident in my ability to have a good structured organizing conversation and do persuasion. I've assessed many times I'm not the right person to go have that conversation with organic leader X, Y, and Z, because there may be another colleague or coworker or someone or minister or whoever it is who's got to actually have the conversation. And part of what we're doing by talking to the activists, the people who want the union, to learn all we can about the organic leader is making it so that by the time we do get to that person in what we know is going to be a hard conversation, because they're in relationship to management, work is working pretty well for them, we have to know everything we can about them to be successful in actually helping them shift what's a long-held idea, right? First of all, the ideology of capitalism is like you respect management, right? I mean, that's what we're told. And for organic leaders who are really good at their job, who a manager is rightfully cultivating every day to keep them happy, to get the job done well, or produce more, or make more money for whoever it is, So it's complex, but it's fundamental, actually, to like know as much as you can to succeed at helping them make the shift from I identify with management and managers to I identify with my coworkers. And I'm going to sacrifice my relationship to managers. Right. It better be good. There better be something good for me to make that decision.
Yep. Well, so when you're having these tough conversations, two questions here. One is, why is it wrong to say we? What's wrong with the we word? And the second one is, what happens when the conversation gets a little too tough for you? What if you don't have the right answer? What if you're unsure about the right answer and you're right in the middle of that tough conversation? What do you do?
Good. Two different but related questions because they're all in a conversation. So the first thing I want to say is, we is not bad. Like, I think people hear me or hear us, now that we have a great training team, like hear us emphasizing why the word you matters so much. In terms of people understanding the relationship between their individual participation and success and outcomes on issues that matter to them in the campaign. So we is not bad. It's a cop-out.
A cop-out?
Yeah, because it's like it makes you anonymous. Like when you just say like, we are going to do this and we are going to do that and we're going to blah 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 blah. The question is, well, who is that? Who is that really? And if we're all walking around saying we all the time, then I think the person that you're talking to, certainly if you're in a hard conversation and you're trying to move an organic leader and you're trying to get thousands of people participating in a campaign, if we don't say to people, it's going to be up to the actions that you and your coworkers take in the campaign. They misunderstanding that they can't win if that individual person does not decide to take action. So it's like, it isn't as if we never say we. We certainly will say we at some point. But the rigidity of the exercise is about, because we abuse and use we so much, it's so badly abused, that when we do the exercises where we say you cannot say the word we, it's just to start a mental exercise. It's like mental floss. It's like teaching you how to redesign how you think about a conversation. And I say the goal is not to say we. That is the goal. It slips in sometimes. It's okay. The key is people have to learn to say you a lot more. Like, I hear that you want to win, a significant raise. 10% coming out of this pandemic, you deserve 10%. That's right. Well, if you are not prepared to take action and sign this public petition, then you are not going to stand a chance at getting a 10% raise. It's going to take you and every single one of your colleagues, and you're going to have to engage them, because someone standing outside your facility who doesn't work here is not going to be effective doing that. You are going to be effective at that. So it's not that we is bad. It's the understanding that it's overused. Us and we is overused, and I'm going to argue, and it might sound strange, except people were in the class with us, so that it can even be like, it feels lazy to me. It's like it's not identifying.
There's who's there.
That's right. There's no accountability, and each individual worker has to take action to build the kind of collective power required to win big. And we're into winning and winning big, if you remember, in this course. So it's really getting the idea across to people that without your active participation, there is no way. The we will be too small. It doesn't even make sense, right? So that's the idea.
All right.
And then on the
you don't have the answer. What's the answer? What's the answer? What do you do?
Oh God, the first thing that's really good about that, which I'm not sure we said during Workers Rising specifically, because there's so much we can say about all these topics, but the one thing is we never make promises. It gets to your question. So like the first thing is never, ever, 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 ever promise a worker that they will get X, Y, and Z. Like that goes back to you. Like you're going to get in proportion to what you put in. Like you're going to win in relationship to the effort that you and your coworkers put into this fight. So you're in a hard conversation and someone asks you a question. Definitely don't make up the answer. Like do not make up the answer. I remember being taught that when I was really, really young, because your impulse is like you want to like make up an answer. And you just shouldn't. And a worker is going to be very respectful of you if you look right at them and you say, that's a great question. I actually don't have the answer to that, and I'm going to get back to you on it. And first of all, it gives you a really good excuse to follow up with the worker. Like, I'm always looking for an excuse to ring back up, phone call, text a worker. So I've said many times in my life, like, that specific question is not something I have an answer to. But then I'm going to do a redirect, by the way, because I'm going to, remember at step 2, we've got to figure out what the top 3 issues are to the worker you're talking to. So if I get tripped up on a question that they're asking me, I'm going to say, I'm not sure about the specific answer to that specific question if it's something very technical that you're asking me. And I'm going to get back to you about that. Meanwhile, I want to go back to what it's going to take for you and your coworkers to make the kind of gains you want to make on that 10% raise, right? What I do know is when we've seen other workers win something like 10%, it's taken individual action by thousands of workers acting collectively, building a really strong organization to be able to win. So I'm just going to redirect. We call that the redirect back to the issue and continue on in the conversation. Don't get tripped up by something you can't answer. Go back to like you've got to walk them through the whole conversation, get your list work in the end, and then you have an excuse to follow up. So don't panic, don't freak out. Be very honest. Just look at them and say, you know, I don't actually have a specific answer to that question. But what I do know is, and then you have to go back to their issue. Going back to their issue, the redirect back to the issue that they told you about is like the way through any hard moment in a conversation.
All right, good. And honesty, starting with honesty. What a radical idea.
And radical idea. Never lie, don't make promises, honesty.
Okay, moving forward into the question of charting, we have sort of a bunch of different, a cluster of questions around how do we make sure that charting doesn't get into employers' hands too quickly? What do we do about moles, about people who are on the employer's side or who aren't acting in good faith? How do we deal with this charting moment, Jane?
I'm just writing some notes down about it because, again, there's like a lot of things to say about this question, but I think a few things. One is, I just assume, first of all, in the age we live in of surveillance, let me just say globally, I mean, this is more true today than it ever has been true. Like, the surveillance is insane right now. I mean, there's almost nothing employers don't know about us. It's kind of terrifying, right? We know, like, the age of computers that we're in. I've always assumed, let's just assume there's a mole in every meeting. Like, my operating principle is that every meeting I go to in a big worker campaign, someone has been sent in there to like take notes and take it away. So I just assume it. So then that gets back to the thing we were just saying, which is what about being honest?
Right.
Right? Because
What a radical idea.
What a
Crazy.
radical idea, right? So I start, and to be honest, it goes back to the Central America movement. I mean, I feel like in the 1980s when I was doing anti-apartheid work, and there was so much in the United States, we had something called counterintelligence, COINTELPRO. I just learned from a very young age, always assume there's a mole in the room, which makes it easy to be honest and not make promises and not tell lies ever, because it's like it's going to get you in trouble at some point. So one is assume there's a mole in the room. And then two, we've had moles get transformed by being sent to a room because they show up in the room and they realize, oh, this is kind of cool. It's not what they told me I was going to go. This meeting they asked me to go crash. Like, it's actually a bunch of my coworkers figuring out how to get more staff on the second shift to make sure a patient doesn't die.
Right.
So literally it backfires sometimes. Like I believe there are people who have come into both negotiations, because at the extreme, right, the method that I teach, we didn't spend a lot of time on it in Workers Rising Everywhere, but we've spent time on it in other classes, which is big and open negotiations. Like, that's where it's, I mean, at the point at which you're going to invite every single person into negotiations anyway, people are like, well, how do you stop the boss from knowing what you're going to do at negotiations? And it's like, the boss is going to know what we're doing. We're going to make this demand across the table. I don't care if someone
Right.
says to the boss, they're coming in for a 7%. Right. Like, we're about to say to you, we're demanding 7%. Right. So kind of who cares? Then the question though, well, and I should bifurcate this and wrap it up quickly. Yeah. First of all, something we don't do enough in the class, we're starting to do this more, right? You and I and the whole training team. It is different if you're in a highly repressive situation in a country with huge repression. We just got to say that. Right. Like, it's completely different scenario if you are living someplace where if they see your name on a document, you could be taken away to jail or killed or fill in the blank. I'm not recommending big structure tests and wall charts in a highly repressive situation. It's a different question. Right. I think wall charting and structure tests do work incredibly well in a non-super repressive situation, right, or context. So back to that, I just want to acknowledge that, but back to it. I would say, like, if the mole is going to lead to someone being killed, then scratch what I said about moles earlier. But if the mole is like going to go tell the employer what we're demanding in negotiations, great, or how many people were in the room, great. Like, turns out they have like 96% of the people agreeing with them. Okay, well, that's a good message to take back to the employer. So it's kind of like, if we're doing our work right, whatever the mole is going to take back, it shouldn't scare us. It's
not about secrets and intrigue. It's about building power,
secrets.
and they can.
And it's super open. And because we're going to be sitting in the room saying, like, you and your coworkers can't get the personal protective equipment you need until 90% of you are ready to like make that demand together. The last thing I'll say about this is, and people always ask it, and I can just say from 25 years of experience, literally, it's never been an issue. Just like in big and open negotiations, and people are always like, what do you mean the workers don't just speak out of turn or do things they're not supposed to do? Or like, it's like an odd question to me all the time. I'm like, if workers are being treated respectfully in the process, it's like authority and responsibility go together. And when you're actually inviting people to participate in building their union, that's what charting and structure tests are, and then being involved in big and open bargaining, people understand that they've just been given a lot of authority and a lot of responsibility. And I've never had the experience of someone stealing a wall chart or taking a picture of it and giving it to someone in 25 years of organizing. It's about the way we're doing the work. It's about the advice to rookie organizers and the principles of honesty. And the last thing I'll say about this, which I think we did say in the course, I think Everline, maybe Lily, I think there were several times when other co-trainers of ours mentioned a core principle of the work too, which is the employer knows this stuff. Like, when I was describing the qualities of a leader, the employer knows who the organic leader is. It's just us who don't half the time. You know what I mean? So it isn't like it's some gigantic secret. It's just, it's not, It's not the thing to worry about. The thing to worry about is, can you get to the damn supermajorities? Don't worry about what the boss is learning. You know, worry about, are we building enough power to beat the boss?
Okay. So on the way to those supermajorities, we can move into structure tests for a moment. And again, clustering questions here a little bit. One, how do we run structure tests when they are not based around negotiations? What do other sorts of structure tests look like? And two, can you talk a little bit more about the theory of escalation that you've discussed a little bit today and also at greater length in the course? What is this theory of escalation when we're talking about successive structure tests?
Great. So, yeah, I guess the first thing is, I do think that our most powerful campaigns are around negotiations. They are around whatever we call it, collective agreements, contracts, you know, the working conditions under which we're going to work. I think that is, from an organizing perspective, if our objective and goal is to bring huge numbers of people into the work, it's the issue that people care about the most. It's the broadest issue that people care about the most, which is like, what am I getting paid? What are the benefits? You know, if my boss is a jerk to me, what rights do I have to, you know, get out from under a bad boss, et cetera? So all of that's framed by your contract or your collective agreement in the trade union context. So in the trade union context, I feel like several things. One is, I actually was taught, I was taught the method of having short contracts. Like, unless the contract is brilliant, which, you know, 50 years of austerity, there aren't many of us getting like brilliant we're getting good ones, you know, but like, unless you've got a brilliant contract, there is no reason to sign a long contract. Because you want to build a little more power or a lot more power and fight again and get better standards. And like, your chance to get better standards, if it comes every 2 or 3 years, it's sort of like life is a perpetual contract fight. So I try to engineer, like literally engineer, short contracts so that we're constantly going to be going back to the table. So it's always about, we just came off one contract, and clearly there's going to be people who are not happy with what we got in the contract. So it's like, we're going to pivot that right into no time like now to start getting stronger for the next contract 2 years from now. So one thing is, it's a choice what the duration is of your contract. Like, workers choose how long that contract is. In most countries, you have a choice about the length of your contract. And most people don't even know that. You can pick a 1-year contract, a 2-year contract, a 3-year contract. It's about your power. Like, duration and length of contract is a huge power fight issue. I write in all of my books, so it's no secret. I was taught that we want short contracts so that we're always have an excuse to bring the most number of workers together. Now, let's say we got a really great deal and it's a 4-year contract or something. It's like, what are you doing for those 4 years then to do structure tests? One, we're incorporating these methods and skills to replace what's called the traditional grievance process. So let's say we're a year into a new contract and it won't be negotiated again for 2 years. So let's say a 3-year contract, and we're a year into it, and the employer violates some clause in the contract. What most unions do, sadly, is go to the grievance and arbitration page on the contract that you've negotiated, and they start filing little pieces of paper with workers individually to try and resolve some issue that the boss broke the contract on. Not the way I was taught. We just roll into a big old petition and say, you know, boss violated this with either this group of 5 workers or a whole group of workers, and we're going to immediately turn it into a structure test, a campaign, and a fight, because we don't want people getting flabby in between the contract fights, right? Like, power is a muscle, and you have to keep using it, and you have to keep flexing it. You cannot let it atrophy. So the big thing that I think we haven't gotten to enough in the class, because again, it could be its own class, is how you transform servicing, what's called servicing, the grievance process, which is, so many people come into Workers Rising. I know from so many questions that I was getting, like, you know, all we do all day is file grievances. And I'm like, you are never going to build the kind of power that we need to make the changes that we need on this planet and in this society. If you are literally, when a worker has a problem, filling out a piece of paper and putting it into a box for management and going through a 6 or 1 year long process, and then a year and a half later you get to an arbitration, that's a union killer. That's literally the death of unions. So for me, you deploy all of the structure test methods constantly in the workplace. Instead of a grievance, let's get a petition together. Let's demand that those 5 workers who got screwed from overtime last night immediately get the money back on their paycheck. We're not going to file a piece of paper about it. We're going to write a piece of paper called a petition. We're going to start to move it like a structure test, and we're going to build a fight around it and have a series of actions. Remind everyone they just went to the gym today. They won an action against the employer. And then you go back to work until the boss does the next stupid thing. And then you do the next structure test around a unit-based issue, an individual issue. I mean, it could even be around, you could be midway through and say, you find out that your employer is part of a gentrification scheme that's going to, move a bunch of affordable housing out of a city and kick a bunch of black people out of a big city or something, which certainly is common in the United States. So your union might have just decided to endorse some campaign around affordable housing. That's not a contract fight. The way to effectively do it, or to remove police, big issue in the United States right now is removing police from schools, for example, right? That's not a, everyone's got their contracts in place. You just start a huge petition, do political education, and say, we demand that police get removed from our schools. Police have no room in our schools. We're mid-contract. We're going to start a fight, run a series of structure tests, and fight to win without the contractual language being involved at all.
Okay, yeah, and so this also gets us away from the notion of somebody else, some expert in some office elsewhere doing things for us, for you, and you actually going out there, writing that sheet of paper, writing that petition.
That's right.
And flexing those muscles that you have been developing.
That's right.
Okay, great. We got a friendly note that we're over 30 minutes, which is good, because now that we're here in person, we could go all day, but we have the nurses and a lot of other folks to get to today. I'm going to sort of do 2 last questions, and they're both going to be sort of big and capacious, so feel free to hop around in each of them. The first of these 2 questions is about how to build wall charts and to organize more broadly in spread out workplaces when the scheduling is spread. There are so many different examples of this in the taxi cab industry when you don't have communal offices. This is also then a COVID question with people working from home. And also perhaps when it's not a workplace, right? When it's a housing unit or even a climate justice campaign of some sort. Well, how does all of this apply then? And I have a feeling that some of those answers we heard already when we were talking about methods versus models.
And I just wrote down methods, but we'll get there.
But yeah, any thoughts on that? Anything that you can expound on?
Yeah, if you think about the era in which these methods were derived from, which was like the 1930s, around the world, what was happening in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, in many countries, but not all, but in sort of the industrializing countries, right? We had gigantic factories, and workers worked in gigantic factories, and that's really where most work was centered. And we know now, not quite 100 years later, but actually the 20s, 1920, 1820s, 1920s, 2020s, the employers have figured out that was a bad idea. Because people actually build really strong bonds when they're in big workplaces. Yep. And, literally the development of the so-called platform economy, which is just an economy of total repression and 1% rule for the rest of the, if we don't challenge it. Yeah, like fomenting isolation among people. We're not quite there, but we can see where they're trying to take us. So it's like literally 100 years, and it's light years from where a lot of these methods were developed in big factories, where even the relationship to the community was much tighter, right? You were in a big factory, you walked out to your town, you walked up so then you think, well, how do the methods get adjusted? It's 100 years later. That's why it's not a model. It's like, how are we adjusting in this moment? So I say that to say that the methods still really matter, because the principles really matter of involving absolutely everybody and bringing the whole community in. Okay, so now we're not in giant factories. So how do we adjust? So to me, there's less structured environments and more structured environments. And it doesn't matter if they're workplace or community. If you're doing dispersed childcare, home-based childcare organizing, or you're doing home health care aid to go to people's homes who never really come to any common workplace, those are big worker campaigns, but they feel as dispersed as if you're doing community-based organizing or housing organizing in a big region. So the challenge is whether it's workers in a workplace campaign against an employer, or whether you're doing community-based organizing. You could be doing community-based organizing in a giant tenant complex, and actually that's going to be easier to do than rural child care workers, even though that's a worker campaign. So I just want to dispel the idea that it's like workplace versus community. It's not. Are the workers or the people that you're trying to engage, are they in a more structured environment or a less structured environment? If they're in a more structured environment, which is what we're focused on trying to encourage people to do, because we got a lot of power to build like in 10 years, according to the climate scientists. So it involves prioritization, like if we could pick our priorities. In the 1930s, they were not organizing the buggy whip factories, right? Like if a buggy whip factory worker called in the 1930s as cars were being developed and said, we got a really hot, factory wanting to organize, and the factory's being closed down because we're not making buggy whips because no one's riding horse and buggy anymore. That wasn't the priority of strategic movements in the 1930s. It was the car and not the horse, right? So it's like today, both are true. We need to have strategic sectors. That's why we talk about strategic sectors. It's not wrong, just like with the difference between an organic leader and an activist. It doesn't mean we're not prioritizing the activist. It's how we're going to build power fast to reverse conditions and save life on this planet. So one, it's about try to pick more structured environments when you can. If you're being strategic, it's not like you ignore everyone else. But if you're going into the community side to do the work, look for a mosque, a temple, a synagogue. If you're doing housing organizing, instead of starting with like slumlords who are spread out across the city, start with a giant apartment complex.
Search out
because
those structures.
Start where someplace you can win and build some power, and then use the power that you've built to then go after the harder to organize slumlords across the city. Same with workers, like start with the hospital workers, but eventually we're going to get to the home health care aides who work very personally and at home. But we're going to do that once we've actually built the power that might unleash a set of local laws that will give us access to, for example, who all those slumlords are and who all the people are. Like, we have to build power first to change the structures that then allow us to use the methods in the less structured environment. So there's priorities, and people just think I'm a climate organizer, I'm a community organizer, this doesn't relate to me. Hell yes, it does. And like people say, oh, well, this is just for unions. It's like there's just the same debate going on among unions. There's less structured work environments and then very structured work environments. We can organize faster and better in a more structured environment, whether that's in the community or whether that's technically against an employer. But the methods work in all of them. The principle is, are you waking up in the morning to figure out what's the total universe you can reach? How are you going to do it? These methods will get you there. You have to adjust them.
Yeah. And it also makes me think that winning begets more winning.
Absolutely.
It builds power. Winning begets winning. And
because it raises people's expectations that they can actually change their life circumstances.
That's right. And, stay tuned. We'll be hopefully focusing on winning going forward in organizing for power programming. So now our last question, I know that we're over time. We want to sort of cut things short after this one question. And it was started as a big cluster, and now I'm going to really simplify it and just say, how do we deal with apathy? How do you deal with workers or folks in your community who are nihilistic, who say, I don't care, who cares about this, whatever, it doesn't really impact me anyway, and then is there just, in closing, anything else that you want to add on to that, to build out of anything else that we've said in today's conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say this in a way that's too, I'm trying to think of it. There's an interview I did years ago, actually, where there's a short snippet where I say, someone in the audience says to me, all the people, all of the workers in all of our workplaces are totally apathetic. Like, it was a question in Canada. I won't say where. And I got like angry. It was like a book talk. And I just said, okay, apathy is your problem. Like apathy is our failure. If people are being apathetic, it means we're not actually doing our work right, because people are pissed off and angry and not happy about their conditions. What they don't have faith in is understanding a way to change them, because they have too infrequently ever seen in our lifetime people actually make the kind of changes that would inspire them to sit up and take action. Right?
And
so
losing begets losing, just like winning begets winning.
Losing begets losing, which is why my first book is entitled, back to the thing we just discussed, Raising Expectations. And I'm super serious about it. Like, I remember Verso Books being like, what the hell is that title? And I was like, that's because you have never organized people. Like, people are beaten down. People are beaten down from 50 years of austerity, from racism, from women from being second-class citizens, whatever it is. Like, people are beaten down. So apathy, but when people, I've never in my life, I've been sent to so many different places to work, and within like one day, we can take what people said was an apathetic bunch of workers and very quickly have a huge meeting because of the message we're describing, which is who's the leader who's going to get them there? Like, first of all, who invites you? So if you find that organic leader, like the organic leader is key to all of this, because we know that we're influenced by people that we know. That's the whole theory of organic leader identification. So if I never met you, but I had never met you, but like in the workplace, my ability to like say, come to a meeting. Like if I just say, come to a meeting, that's not going to work. But if I find the person who you're in relationship to, and that person says to you, in order for you to make the change on the child care policy so that you can get home and actually pick the kid up at the bus stop on time, it's going to require you and I going to this meeting to figure out how together we're going to make a plan to change it. And the person's going to say, there's no way we can do that. And you're going to say, hell yes, because here's how they did it in these 3 other places, right? So the first principle of combating apathy is you have to re-raise people's expectations that we can actually win. That's step one. And you do that by being able to offer a credible plan to win, by centering the worker in the conversation, by helping them connect the dots between the issue that matters to each worker and how building a powerful collective organization is going to get them out of the mess. Like, start by raising expectations, offer a credible plan. Those are all the steps we go through in the structured organizing conversation. And I always say apathy is movement failure.
Okay.
So that's why you got to come back for the next course.
That's right. I think that's a good closing note for us. And it's, again, great being here with you in person, having the chance for us to do this little question and answer face-to-face for the first time.
Face-to-face.
Face-to-face. And we look forward to seeing all of you very soon. Please stay tuned. We'll be in touch about our upcoming programming. We have lots of good things that we are cooking up over these days. So we will be in touch with all of you again soon. And until then, be safe. Be safe. That's right. And be strong as well in your struggles. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night to all of you, and we'll see you soon.